Well, good morning, church. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May He make His face to shine upon you. I love the energy. It's just good to have the whole family together this morning, isn't it? I love it. Amen. Oh, nobody's excited about that. Well, you could cheer for that. This is always the weird thing. Second service, my quiet service. 9 a.m. is my loud service. Nobody knows what to do, how to do it. We are glad you are with us. I walked in this morning and I almost went home. Mike was wearing a collared shirt. Usually he does that when he preaches. So I thought he was going to preach for me. But I'm here. No, it's okay. It's okay. I love it. That's good. Welcome. We are glad you are here. My name is Rod. I'm one of the pastors here. And welcome to our holiday service as we are in our series called Behind the Veil, where we are walking through the book of Esther. Last week we just told the story of Esther. You guys brought in mac and cheese, and I see that when we just shake mac and cheese, a lot of people come to Jesus, so that's good to know. You guys brought in 445 boxes of mac and cheese. That'll all be at our Hummel distribution, food distribution on Friday. So thank you to all the people who are going to be there serving and passing that out. We are excited about just caring for our community. So, Esther, here we go. We all struggle to see God working from time to time. We want to know God is in control, but it can feel like life is just happening. We worry how we would react in extraordinary circumstances. Would we have faith to stand up to others? Would we continue to follow Jesus in the face of difficult situation? The story of Esther is just that. So, I was expecting that all week, and then this morning I totally forgot about it. Well played, sir. Well played. Okay, 446 boxes of mac and cheese, I guess. That's perfect. Well, it's the story of courage in the face of racism. God moving behind the veil. The story of extraordinary courage and dignity in a time when these character traits were lacking. We hope that throughout this series we will be strengthened and our faith will grow as we study the book of Esther. The book of Esther is a very curious book. God is never mentioned. It doesn't deal with worship or faith. There are no prophecies of the coming Messiah, no mention of heaven or hell. There's not much about this book that is religious at all. This book has been difficult to authenticate. Most scholars, believe it or not, don't like it. Martin Luther said he doesn't like the book and feels like it's a travesty that it's on a reputation on par or better than Isaiah or Daniel. One Hebrew scholar I read this week said, I wouldn't mind if it was thrown out of the Bible. Very interesting. Others are confused if it is study worthy. They struggle to know if it's true or just a historical novella. Either way, it's okay with me. Neither stance nullifies the Bible and its historical references. Jesus used stories and parables to drive home a point. Does the prodigal son have to be true in order for it to bear truth on our lives? Do we really think that heaven is like a mustard seed? Right? We must understand genres as we read the Bible as well. When a story reads once upon a time, it's different than a law journal. A novel is read different than an autobiography. A story based on history is different than a history book. And each has a place and each is read differently. Now, church, I would argue Esther is not either or, that it is both and. Let me explain. I contend we should read Esther as a novel. This is what I mean. There is a great plot and action. There's suspense. There's reversal. There's great drama. Go home and read it all in one sitting. Don't make it one-dimensional. So often when we're reading the Bible like that, we just read it just very flat, like we're reading a news article, and we read novels different. I think we could read Esther that way. But I will also be pointing out the historical accuracies of the book. So I think it's both. I think it was written to be read as a great story. I also believe that it's historically accurate. So the question is, with all this drama around it, why study it? Because it's there. There's no better answer. Here at Mosaic, we like to study all of the Bible. We don't want to pick and choose and just study the easy books or the easy passages. We want to study the whole Bible. And so if you are new, there is a pattern to our preaching here. Every fall, we take a story and we spend the whole 3 months in that story. And so when it was time to pick a story, there were many that we wrestled with, but we thought, why not Esther? So a couple months ago, as I started researching this, I asked on Facebook, here's the question I asked. I said, what is your favorite book of the Bible? A few things came up. People were like, man, I love Ephesians because it gives us great instruction. Some said, James is such a practical book. I love reading that one. Even somebody said, Job, because when I'm dealing with difficult things, it's a good book to read. You know what book was never mentioned? Esther. Actually, one person mentioned it. It's because his wife's name is Esther, but it wasn't, he was sucking up to his wife. He wasn't saying it was his favorite book. Very interesting. I believe Esther's issues are our issues, whether we like it or not. It's a powerful story confronting racism, ethnic issues, and how the question is that it tries to answer is, how do we live in an increasingly hostile land? How do we communicate God's truth to people who don't believe? How do we live in a place where we are powerless and have no voice? How do we operate in a kingdom that's not our own? Scholar B.W. Anderson said, a minister should not waste time trying to show the heroes of this book as models of character, integrity, or piety. I agree. So often we do this. We want to find the heroes in the Bible, and we want to try and build people up because they're a biblical character. They must have been bigger than life. They must have been better. But the thing I love about the Bible, and this is one of the things why I think this book is true. If you were writing the Bible on your own, you would never show the flaws of the main people in the Bible. But you know what the Bible does? Every person in here is fallen. Every person in here is broken minus Jesus. And what we like to do is we like to put ourselves in the hero's place, and then when we read the villains in the story, we think that's everybody else. But the truth is this, there's one hero in the book, his name is Jesus, and then there's everybody else. And you know whose side you're on? Everybody else's, right? And so I think we don't want to read the book of Esther and put people on pedestals. I think we're just reading a historical story about their lives because they're real people like you or me. The hero of Esther is the story of God. He sees us and knows our trouble. It's no mistake that this book has been a Jewish favorite throughout the years of persecution. They are reminded that they are seen and loved by God. My first thing I want you to know about the book of Esther is this. Esther is about ordinary beginnings and extraordinary endings. Esther is about ordinary beginnings and extraordinary endings. Most of our lives are lived in ordinary days and ordinary ways. We love to think of our life like a movie, but most of us live boring, ordinary lives. Boring. The same thing happening every day. Let me give you an example. For the last 5 years, I've eaten the same thing for breakfast and lunch. I just do. My staff could probably set their clock by what I eat, right? I have a protein shake when I get to work about 7, and then about 10 a.m. I come out with an apple and almonds. At noon, I take another protein shake. I mean, they can just set their clock by what I do. So ordinary. I would love to think that I would be a great movie character. Nobody wants to watch that. It is boring. It is the same thing day in and day out, right? I get up at a certain time. I do the same things every day. I never expect anything extraordinary to happen. This is the same way with most stories. They start very ordinary, nothing spectacular. In fact, most people wouldn't notice the beginning of something extraordinary because it blends into the background, just like the start of every other day. The morning rain slowly starts that leads to a worldwide flood. A normal day until a bush bursts into flames and doesn't burn up. A shepherd tending his flock in the morning right before his dad called him in, and by the end of the day, he was chosen to be the next king of Israel. The morning starts with a mom going into labor, and then the King of Kings is born. Think of this, even the day Jesus resurrected started like any other day. No one expected anything amazing to take place. How many stories start this way? Very ordinary. Now, let's jump into Esther. Esther chapter 1. These events happened in the days of King Xerxes, who reigned over 127 provinces, stretching from India to Ethiopia. At the time Xerxes ruled his empire from his royal throne at the fortress of Susa, in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all his nobles and officials. He invited all the military officers of Persia and Media, as well as the princes and nobles of the province. Just an ordinary day. Nothing spectacular, just a king ruling over his kingdom. So what we know is he reigned from 486 BC to about 465 BC. And we know from the story that this was the 3rd year of his reign. And he throws a banquet, nothing out of the ordinary. Kings always were throwing banquets, always trying to show off their riches, right? Always trying to want everybody to see their extravagance for all the people. Verse 4, the celebration lasted 180 days. A tremendous display of opulent wealth of his empire and the pomp and splendor of his majesty. Now this is something different, a 6-month party, right? Every kind of extravagance, eating too much, drinking too much. This was all about the king. Now what's interesting, we know King Xerxes was a real king. We have uncovered his inscription. So I want you to catch this. This is what King Xerxes wrote about himself. The great king, the king of kings, the king of lands occupied by many races, the king of this great earth. He thought a lot about himself. He didn't struggle with an inferiority complex, that's for sure. So we continue on, a 180-day party, and even that wasn't enough. When it was all over, the king gave a banquet for all the people, from the greatest to the least, who were in the fortress of Susa. It lasted for 7 days and was held in the courtyard of the palace guard. Okay, so the celebration ends, and then he lets everybody in, right? So you have all the leaders and the princes and all the riches are coming to party for 180 days. He doesn't want the party to end, so he opens up and he lets everybody come in, right? Have you ever been there, been to a great party? You're doing something and you're like, oh, I just don't want it to end. Well, the king didn't either, so he continues it on for 7 more days. We're going to see sometimes it's good to leave the party early. That's just my piece for you there. So he opens the doors to everybody. And I'm sure they came in by the thousands, even just to see the castle. Right? Verse 6, the courtyard was beautifully decorated with white cotton curtains and blue hangings, which were fastened with white linen cords and purple ribbons to silver rings, embedded in marble pillars. Gold and silver couches stood on mosaic pavements of porphyry, marble, mother of pearl, and other costly stones. It must have been a beautiful sight, very extravagant. Drinks were still served in gold goblets of many designs, and there was an abundance of royal wine reflecting the king's generosity. By edict of the king, no limits were placed on the drinking, for the king had instructed all the palace officials to serve each man as much as he wanted. Think about that. It's an open bar for 7 days for everyone. What would Vegas be like if the casinos were like, if you walk in the door, you're served free liquor for 7 days. No limits, just everybody come. We're going to open the place up. Here's what I think. Good and healthy decision making would be in short supply. And that's what we're going to see. At the same time, Queen Vashti gave a banquet for the women in the royal palace of King Xerxes. So she's not at this party. She's having her own get-together where, I don't know, they're quilting or doing something like that. They're having a good time. I'm not being bad. Maybe they're playing bunco, right? All the ladies who showed up to bunco. I don't know, but they're doing their own thing. I want you to notice this. The 6-month party was for the guys, right? Getting together in different areas of the palace. This just seems like a recipe for disaster, right? A lot of times your wife, girlfriend, whoever it is that's with you, probably keeps you anchored. When you start doing something, they're like, don't do that. Come back over here, right? But there was none of that. If you stay at the party too long, here's what you hear. Hold my beer, right? That's kind of what we're getting ready for, is this like, watch this moment. On the 7th day of the feast, so the party's been going on for 6 months and a week, right? 6 months, 1 week, the last day of the feast, when King Xerxes was in high spirits because of the wine, he told the 7 eunuchs who attended him to bring Queen Vashti to him with his royal crown on her head. He wanted the nobles and all the other men to gaze on her beauty, for she was a very beautiful woman. The party is turning ugly. Things are not going well. He wants to parade his wife before all of these drunk men. Many scholars believe that he asked her to come in wearing nothing but her crown. Now, I'm not sure how to interpret it, but here's what I know. It's debauchery nonetheless. Whatever it was, look at this. When they conveyed the king's order to Queen Vashti, she refused to come. This made the king furious, and he burned with anger. Now, Queen Vashti for the win here, but whatever the command, she refused, and this was no easy response. She could be put to death for refusing the king, and this humiliates him as well. So, he immediately consults with the wise advisors who knew all the Persian laws and custom, for he always asked their advice. What must be done to Queen Vashti, the king demanded. What penalty does the law provide for a queen who refuses to obey the king's orders properly sent through his eunuchs? Okay, he doesn't know what to do. He gets his trusted advisors together, his cabinet, he gets them all around him. What's interesting is they're baffled. They never saw this coming. Like nobody ever refuses. This probably was the first time that had ever happened in their lifetimes, that the king had requested somebody and somebody had refused. The king always got what he wants. Then Memucan answered the king and his nobles. Queen Vashti was wronged, not only the king, but also every noble and citizen throughout your empire. This gets crazy. Women everywhere will begin to despise their husbands when they learn that Queen Vashti had refused to appear before the king. Bless you. Before this day is out, the wives, all of the king nobles throughout Persia and Media will hear what the queen did, and bless you again, and she will start treating their husbands the same way. Bless you. Am I the only one that said it? Come on, people. Be around him. Tell him bless you, right? There will be no end in their contempt and anger. Okay, so let me go back and unpack that a little bit. Talk about an overreaction. I bet Memucan was a delight to be around. Like, dude, he's so freaked out that the queen says no, that all of a sudden his wife won't listen to him, right? They're so afraid of losing their power, they act like their wives are going to start a revolt just because the queen said no. So if it please the king, we suggest that you issue a written decree. Now, I want to explain something really here. I want to unpack this just a touch because we live in a land of laws where bad laws hopefully get repealed, where we amend the Constitution, right? Where we go, well, that didn't really work. We need to fix that stuff. But in this time, in this land, when a decree was written, you couldn't repeal it. It was law forever, which means that they must have had a lot of laws on the books. But this is going to come into play time and time again throughout this whole story. So what we need to remember is that once this is written, it can't be refused. So we should issue a written decree. It should order that Queen Vashti be forever banished from the presence of the king, Xerxes, and that the king should choose another queen more worthy than she. When this decree is published throughout the king's vast empire, husbands everywhere, whatever their rank, will receive proper respect from their wives. This is so funny to me. They're going to take this letter home and show it to their wives? Well, this will make them submit. Honey, would you read this? Right? Like somehow that's going to put everything in place? I'm not sure why they thought that would work or that was the way to go. Whenever we lean on rules outside of relationships, we are missing the point, church. Now, I'm not talking about healthy boundaries. I think boundaries are good and lead to healthy relationships. I think they're very important. But relationships are not built on rules and boundaries alone. If I have to tell my employees to follow my rules and I start micromanaging their behavior, it's already over. Our relationship is already broken, right? I've been to toxic churches, maybe you have, where the pastor relies on location, not situation. You're going to do what I say because I'm the pastor. Right? This is the way it's going to go because I said so. That's not at all what a family does. Right? That's crazy because you guys got it. Now, if you're new, I'm sorry, you're like, hold it. I don't want to. You're fine. You're good. Here's what you guys know. Legislating behavior always works. Right? Because none of you sped on the way here, right? You didn't not make a complete stop because there's a law on the books, right? This doesn't work. If I asked you, why do you love your wife? And you said, because she does what I say. It's not what relationships are built on, bro. By this time, things are probably in trouble, right? If you come in my office and I say, what do you love about each other? And you say, well, she does what I say, you're in my office for a reason. I'm just thinking that's probably. So the kings and nobles thought this made good sense. So he followed Memucan's counsel. Here's what I know. Everything sounds good at a party. This probably makes the king look foolish. He's not even sober yet. And he writes this decree. I wonder about a week later, did he go, so I did what? we wrote what, right? So he sends letters to all part of the empire, to each province in its own script and language, proclaiming that every man should be the ruler of his home and should say whatever he pleases. That's pretty shocking. Let me pause for a minute. I believe biblical submission is beautiful. I think that there is something to relationship and submission. But here's the interesting thing. Let me just, before you go home and say, yeah, Rod said you're supposed to submit. Let me just read the scripture we use for that. So first of all, we skip this first line here. I'm in Ephesians 5:21. Guys, you just like to jump to 22. 22 says, wives, submit yourself to your own husbands as you do the Lord. So we like that. That's great. But how come we skip the first one where it says, submit to one another? Well, I'm not supposed to submit to my wife. Read 22. Just forget 21. And then we stop right there. We don't jump down to here. 25, husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Right? We like to submit, but what is harder to do, submit or die to? Jesus died for the church, gave everything to the church, gave the Spirit, gave all its resources so the church could do whatever it could do to grow, made sure everything, no matter what, that the church was poised for success. Jesus went to every length to make sure the church was successful. What's harder, that or submit? That's why we don't like the second verse. We just say submit, right? So I think there is a beautiful thing in marriage when we submit to one another, when we love one another, when we listen to one another, when we walk through. And guys, can I just talk to you for a minute if you're struggling in this area? I don't think there's anything a woman wouldn't do if she knows her husband has her best interest at heart, wants to protect, wants to care for her, wants to make sure she is the most successful person there, just loves her unconditionally, wants her to be the woman that Christ has built her into. If you start on that foot, you're starting in a good position. And wives, I think, man, wives submit all the time when guys are that way, right? And when you're submitting, I just think it's a dual thing. It's not an either or, it's a both and. And I think when we come together, we don't have to worry about this stupid scripture, right? Do whatever he pleases. Okay, moving on. That's enough about that. I don't ever, yeah. I think the church has, okay, so not moving on. I think the church has missed it a bit, and we have allowed abuse to happen in the home when we just highlight one verse and not God's whole text, and we pick and choose. We allow abusive things to go on, and Jesus never wants your wives to be abused. So, and if you are, you have to deal with him, not me. So we're okay. It's good. You'll figure it out. Okay, so we need one another, right? We want to be redeemers of one another. You're probably thinking, where are we going, Rod? All we have is a big party, a lot of debauchery, a bunch of frustrated men, and a queen who has been removed. Remember, God not only moves in miraculous ways, he also moves in mundane ways as well. Don't divorce God for the story. The whole point of this series is behind the veil. It may not say God, but you can start to see God moving throughout this story. It may be why Vashti never was put to death. God is protecting and moving behind the scenes. So let me summarize. Out with Vashti, in with Esther. That's where we are. I'm sure Esther has no idea her life is about to change. She's going about her life, her day-to-day routine, but things are getting ready to change. She doesn't see God working on her behalf. Things are being moved around outside of her place. God is being present in situations that will affect her for years to come. So let's jump into chapter 2. But after King Xerxes' anger had subsided, okay, we read that and we think, I sobered up, must have been a couple months. Here's the funny thing. Between chapter 1 and chapter 2, 4 years. 4 years, we're jumping ahead 4 years right here. And so the question starts to be is, what happened in the 4 years, right? So 4 years later, after King Xerxes' anger had subsided, he began thinking about Vashti and what she had done and the decree he had made. The question is, what happened in those 4 years between the party and him missing his wife? Well, history books tell us that in those 4 years, he tried to conquer Greece. And the campaign was a disaster. He won 1 or 2 battles. One of them may be one of the most famous battles in the land against Sparta, right? It has been memorialized, I will say, in graphic novels and a movie called The 300 and a lot of the fancy stuff. Some of that isn't true, but he did win that battle, but the war was lost. So think about coming home after a large defeat. No one to comfort him, no one to greet him. I wonder if he regretted his decision after his unbreakable decree. It seems he may have been depressed or at least sad enough that his servants were observing him. So his personal attendant suggested, let's search the empire to find a beautiful young virgins for the king. Let the king appoint agents to each province to bring these beautiful young women into the royal harem at the fortress of Susa. After that, the young women who most pleased the king will be made queen instead of Vashti. This advice was very appealing to the king, so he put the plan into effect. I just want to pause here really quick also. The Bible just doesn't pull punches. I was talking to somebody a couple days ago. I was having coffee on Friday morning at somebody's house, and they asked this question: Rod, are you going to talk about the fact that we have women that are struggling with body image stuff, and all we talk about is the beauty? And I said, not really. Not that I don't agree with that, it's just not the story. And so one of the things that I just want to say here is, the king is doing what the king does, and the Bible isn't elevating this, it's just showing you the debauchery of the situation. And we don't know always, we say, the Bible says Queen Esther was beautiful, but beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and I think you're going to see that God uses this one attribute of Esther for some amazing things. So I'm just going to leave it there. We're having a beauty pageant to find a new queen. It's just what is happening. The fact, this is interesting, the women will spend a year getting ready. And I always think, well, how long did the king spend getting ready? But that's not in the story. Before each young woman is taken to the king's bed, she is given the prescribed 12 months of beauty treatment, 6 months with oil of myrrh, followed by 6 months with special perfumes and ointments. It's a lot of pampering, a lot of mani-pedis, a lot of getting everything ready. Now let's look at what God is doing outside of the palace. So this is what's going on inside the palace, but God is even moving in all of this craziness. Where is God's hand preparing people for what is coming? Verse 5, this time there was a Jewish man in the fortress of Susa whose name was Mordecai. His family had been among those who had been exiled from Jerusalem to Babylon by King Nebuchadnezzar. So he was part of the Jewish people that were taken prisoner. Nebuchadnezzar had them, so he's living in this foreign land. He's unrelated to the king. He's just a guy living out his years in exile. I'm sure every day ran into another. Nothing spectacular was happening. I'm sure he was just working a job trying to make ends meet, hoping someday he would see his hometown again. And he was raising his orphaned cousin. This man had a very beautiful and lovely young cousin, Hadassah, who was also called Esther. When her father and mother died, Mordecai adopted her into his family and raised her as his own daughter. So 2 things when we're introduced to Esther: she's orphaned in a foreign land and she is beautiful. Hadassah actually comes from the word myrtle, which means fragrant. Myrtle is a lowly shrub that is very fragrant. Myrtle branches are still carried by the Jews today during the Feast of Tabernacles to signify peace and thanksgiving. God sure is moving. So here's what I want to look at. I want to look at his plans, his purpose, and his people. How does God work through his plans, his purpose, and his people? So, 3 ways that God works in uneventful times. 1, God's plans are not hindered by the carnal or the secular. God is at work everywhere. We like to draw boundaries of where he can work and where he won't work, right? Well, he's going to work through my candidate, but he's not going to work through that other evil candidate, right? God is present everywhere. He's at work in the casinos as much as he's at work in my office. He works in Iran and China as much as he works in the United States of America. He's working in your marriage and in your neighbor's marriage, whether they believe in Jesus or not. Seeing God everywhere helps us do what Jesus has called us to do. So what has Jesus called us to do? Matthew 5:13 and 14. You are the salt of the earth. But what good is salt if it has lost its flavor? Can you make it salty again? It will be thrown out and trampled underfoot as worthless. You are the light of the world, like a city on a hilltop that cannot be hidden. Church, you're supposed to be salt. Salt is an outside product that is added to help flavor and slow the decay of food. It doesn't reverse it or stop the decaying process. You need to hear this. Cured meat will still go bad. It just takes a lot longer to go bad. So you're called into the world to slow the decaying process. So a lot of times people are like, Rod, the world is getting worse. And I'm like, yep, but think of how bad it would be if we weren't here. Think about how bad it would be, how dark it would be, how hopeless it would be without Jesus, right? That is the point. If Christians weren't fighting against the darkness, bringing love and Christ-like behavior everywhere we go, it would get worse. Now, what's interesting about salt is it's a localized product. In other words, by you doing something, you may not make the whole world better. And I think we get lost in that, like, what can I do? The world is getting worse. What can I do? Well, maybe nothing on a big scale, but you can change your community. You can change your neighborhood. You can change the lives of the people you hang out with, and that will, sooner or later, change the world. Your sphere of influence can change. Remember, light removes darkness. You're called to be light. Go to the world. Remove the darkness around you. We are called to the world to share Jesus, and we can trust that God's plans are not hindered by our brokenness. God's plans are not hindered if we don't do it correctly. God's plans are not hindered if we don't say the right things. God's plans always move forward. The second, God's purposes aren't frustrated by moral or marital failures. I hope this is encouraging, especially if you feel like you have failed. God's purposes are still moving forward. Now, yes, God values holiness. Our disobedience grieves him, and it's usually followed by consequences, but we worship a God of grace and love. He forgives us and he redeems us. His purposes are not thwarted because of humanity's brokenness. This gives me great solace because it's not up to me. And it's not up to you. Romans 8:28. As we know that God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose for them. I don't know if you even catch how important this is. God doesn't need you, but he chooses to use you. And that is a privilege. That is an amazing thing. What a beautiful way to see redemption when we understand he doesn't waste a hurt. So many years ago, I decided I was going to change careers and become a pastor. And through that process, I was smoking cigarettes on a regular basis. Teens, don't smoke. It's bad for you. There's my PSA for the day. So my wife would say this. She would come home and say this, hey, today we're going to quit. And I'd always be like, you got a frog in your pocket? And in all honesty, she could just walk away from cigarettes, put them down. Me, I climbed the walls. I quit drinking years ago. Smoking was way harder for me to give up. There was something about that hook of nicotine that I could not let go of, and I struggled and struggled and struggled. But I wanted to look good on the outside. So it wasn't that I couldn't quit and was honest. I just told Diane I quit and kept smoking. Seems like a really solid plan. Seems like I had thought that out really well. A couple months had gone by. It's a long story, but she found out, and it was a pretty broken part of our marriage. And I think for the first couple days, we weren't sure we were going to get through this. I mean, we had faith. I think at a lower level we thought we would, but it was a pretty difficult time in our lives, not because of the smoking, because of the lying, because of the deceit, because of the ways that I would hide it and do things around it and buy them in secret so she couldn't see them on the debit card, and all of the different lying and cheating. Last week, you're going to hear more about this next week. Our staff took a trip down to Watts, California. We're going to be doing mission trips down there. There's a great outreach, so we were down there. We were doing that, and I got a call from a really good friend of mine who's a pastor who was dealing not with the same, wasn't smoking, but there was some sort of lying in their relationship, and it had nothing. The behavior wasn't so bad that it was going to destroy anything, but I sat out in the backyard and talked to him for about an hour, just walking through the pain of deceit and brokenness and what do lies do in a marriage. And you know what? I got to tell you, God used that brokenness in my life to help another couple walk through this. I'm sure I'm going to be walking with this couple for a long time through this, but I love this, that his plans continue and his purpose for us, church, will continue to go, right? When we are open to what God is doing through our brokenness, that his purpose for you, right there, that God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose for them, that's you. Okay. Part 3, God's people are not excluded from prominent positions due to handicap or hardship. Have you ever discounted yourself due to the life you've lived? I mean, think about it. God could never use an orphaned Jew in a foreign land to change history. I mean, Rod, God can't use someone like me. I've been through too much. I'm limited in my ability. I don't have any special talents. You know what, church? You're just the kind of person God wants to use. God's hand isn't so short that he can't save someone or use them. God's ear isn't so heavy that he doesn't hear our cries. God uses everyday people in ordinary circumstances to do incredible things. Let me say that again. God uses everyday people in ordinary circumstances to do incredible things. And we discount ourselves all the time. I can't make a difference. Maybe God's calling you into the community to make a difference in your kid's school, possibly on a school board. Maybe he's calling you to make a difference in your neighborhood. Maybe you're supposed to be a part of the dreaded, hated HOAs of your community. Maybe he wants you to serve here. God wants to use you to further his plans, to fulfill his purpose for you. Many times we just don't see it. Make sure you're looking for God and you will see him everywhere. So we were in Seattle. We decided to take a job in Alaska, and the weirdest thing happened. All of a sudden, everybody around us was driving cars with Alaska license plates. I mean, they just were never there before. Ever done that? Maybe you're here or you were going to move to Vegas and then all of a sudden you start seeing Nevada license plates all around. Or you're thinking about, hey, I'm going to do this one thing, and minus your phone telling you, because it is listening to you. But besides that, we start to see these things all around. And this is the point, church, that when we start looking, we will see it. Right? When you start opening your eyes and going, man, I think God is working all around, you're going to start seeing God working all around. If you're like, man, would you just show me how you're working in ordinary people, in ordinary times, in ordinary ways to do extraordinary things, you're going to start seeing that happen all around you. All of a sudden, we start seeing God move in the most ordinary ways throughout the most mundane days. He is always working to accomplish his plans, fulfill his purpose, and use his people. Let's pray.